Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, colleagues. And I'm very happy to be here and learn from my colleagues, but also look forward to an opportunity to get some feedback from you folks, in particular in some of the areas where the IDB is active. I want to start by Alan today said you can do a presentation on climate change by just repeating what Bob Watson said a little more slowly. And we did not collude on this, but I do want to start with three things that he said. He said that the impacts of climate change are predominantly negative, primarily affecting developing countries and poor people. Human-induced climate changes should be viewed as a risk management issue. And then he also said that the most effective strategy to address climate change is through a long-term, equitable global mitigation strategy, and then he put a couple of other things behind that. The reason I wanted to state these statements again is because they really do summarize the IDB's position on climate change. It's about poor people, poor countries who get mostly affected. It's about human-induced activities that need to be seen as risk issues. And it's also about the importance, in fact, the vitalness of having a global strategy. But I would just add one more point to finalize the real summarize really what the IDB's position is, and that is, even though we need desperately a global strategy, a global agreement, it should not be a prerequisite for MDBs to take action where they can. And to that end, some of you might know that the IDB's just released a climate change strategy, and in that strategy is very much a suite of activities laid out, everything from vamping up investments in critical areas and key sectors, to developing knowledge and tools instruments, doing a much better job on vulnerability analysis and resilience analysis and management, and also to mainstream environment in our project level as a safeguard issue. And that's the thing I'd like to just kind of touch on, focus on. My colleagues have done a really good job touching on the other things of resilience issues, issues of accounting, and we are involved in those. And we're working together in those areas. But I wanted to touch a little bit more on the safeguard issues, on the, not so much the impacts of climate change on our project, but more the reverse, the impacts of our projects on climate change. We've made some pretty good headway. We have started off, and actually we've benefited by our policy stating, this is our policy approved in 2006, that basically encourages the reduction control of greenhouse gas emissions. That for us is a very important anchor. That is anchored in our policy, and it says you shall account for and measure greenhouse gas emissions, but it also says you need to encourage reduction and control of these. So how do we do that? The first issue we came across is, gee, where are the benchmarks for doing this? Do you just do it on a case-by-case basis? And we got into big trouble on a case-by-case basis. We had one coal-fired plant that caused us no end of difficulty because we were treating it on a case-by-case basis. So we decided we actually needed to deal with these at a sector basis, a technology basis, and lay it all out in a very clear and transparent way. So our efforts have gone into developing sector-based guidelines that establish performance criteria to limit greenhouse gas productions of the projects we finance. These can be set out and have been set out in terms of preferences for technologies, preferences for level of performances of these technologies, preferences for specific processes, but always with the goal of reducing or translating these into reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. We've developed guidelines for coal-fired plants. That was our first. Second one, cement production plants, and third one, landfill sites. We're in the process right now of developing others, in particular other ones for thermal plants, and my colleague Emmanuel Boulet here is going to be talking more about the coal-fired plants this afternoon and possibly branch out into other areas. If you push him hard enough, he might do that. Why did we do this? Well, first of all, we wanted to make sure that we could say something about what we're doing to make our projects climate responsible. We also wanted to establish as transparently as possible what are those performance expectations. We wanted to send a signal to both potential clients, investors, and governments who seek IDB financing. And we're also making it very clear that this is always something that's evolving. What seems like great technology today may be obsolete in 5 years, so we reserve the right to ratchet up if we need to. Are we asking for the highest level of performance? Absolutely not. But what we don't want to do is scrape the bottom of the barrel. There's no reason why. Our view is, with limited development resources, that we should be financing obsolete, inefficient technology, and technology that may end up locking in some of our clients for the next 20 to 25 years with either high emissions releases and higher costs, potentially. So as part of our due diligence today, in the context of these guidelines, we examine what are the technology options, what are the management practices that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And if we need to, we will, and we have requested or financed additional analysis for that. Now, it seems very straightforward, and I know that the more we get into this, the harder it will be. And one area that we're beginning to tackle is land use change. In other words, greenhouse gas emissions from land use change. For us, in our region, it's absolutely sumamente importante. Estimates range up to 47% of our region's greenhouse gas emissions come from land use change. IDB is well known for financing roads and other infrastructure projects that, in fact, can and have stimulated land use change. So our big challenge before us is how do we get our heads wrapped around that in terms of not just measuring it, but also doing something about it. Sure, we've got RED and other interesting discussions happening at the UN and international level, which are a fundamental reference point for us. We've got fantastic things happening on the ground in terms of technological innovations in measuring carbon, scenario modeling. There's some really cool things out there. But what we're finding, and I think we will find as we get more into this issue, difficult are to answer questions such as these. What are acceptable levels of greenhouse gas emissions from a project that has land use change effects? How do we facilitate, or what kind of incentives can we put in place to ensure that people see benefits in preserving the carbon stock, either in forests, soil, other areas? Those are not so easy, but I think we need to try, and that's something that we set out to do, is to begin in the shallow end of the pool and start basically scoping out the issues, figuring out what the right questions are that we need to answer, and starting to answer the easier ones first. What are the challenges that we've encountered? As you can imagine, there was a perception that we are imposing greenhouse gas reductions on countries. There was a perception that we're basically forcing countries to take limits, and we were very clear in saying that's not the case. This is about establishing a preference for certain technologies to ensure a certain level of performance, not unlike what we do with other pollutants, whether it's BOD or mercury. Those are things that we ask in our projects, and carbon dioxide, as far as we're concerned, is just one more pollutant. And as I mentioned, we're not going for the top of the technology. This is not the best technology. This is not the leading edge technology. It's just not the bottom of the barrel technology. The other challenge we had was, and we still have, and I mentioned to those, there's still so many outstanding issues still out there. RED, issues of definition, methodology, and how do we move, and how fast can we go in a vacuum? And then the third one, and this is one where I think there's a lot of room for collaboration also among MDBs, and that is, where can we find really good reference points for good practice, for good performance of technologies? They're there sometimes, and we've had help, we've actually had, and I have to really acknowledge the help of IFC with respect to our cement guidelines. We couldn't have done it without the help of the IFC in terms of the information that you have in terms of performance. But perhaps this is something that would benefit all of us if we were to have a greater discussion on this nitty-gritty question of greenhouse gas emissions and project performance. Thank you very much.